the people who seem to provoke you, the circumstances that appear to disturb your peace, none of these have any power whatsoever. They are shadows cast by your own consciousness, reflections of your inner conversations, materializations of your dominant mental states. The man who cuts you off in traffic, the colleague who speaks rudely to you, the family member who disappoints you, these are not independent forces acting upon you. They are your own consciousness pushed out, appearing in your world to show you exactly what you have been assuming to be true about life, about people, about yourself. But how can this be, you ask? How can it be that others are not really causing my disturbance? The answer lies in understanding the true nature of consciousness itself. You see, consciousness is the only reality. Everything else, the entire manifested world, is consciousness expressing itself in infinite varieties and forms. You are not a body housing consciousness, you are consciousness itself, temporarily focused through what appears to be an individual experience. When you realize that everyone in your world is your own consciousness pushed out, everything changes. The person who angers you is showing you your own assumption about how people treat you. The situation that frustrates you is revealing your own belief about how life unfolds for you. The circumstance that seems beyond your control is actually your own inner conversation made manifest in your external experience. This is why the mystics of all ages have declared that the kingdom of heaven is within you. This is why every enlightened being has taught that you must change yourself to change your world. They were not speaking metaphorically or symbolically. They were revealing the literal, mechanical operation of consciousness itself. Now, when you first hear this, your rational mind will rebel. It will assert you with 1,000 of arguments about how surely that difficult was to be difficult, how certainly that challenging situation arose independent of your thinking. But I ask you to suspend your rational objections for a moment and consider the implications of what I am sharing with you. If it is true that your world is your consciousness pushed out, then every person who bothers you, every situation that disturbs you, every circumstance that angers you is actually a gift. It is consciousness itself showing you exactly what assumptions you have been harboring, what beliefs you have been entertaining, what inner conversations you have been conducting. Instead of being victims of these experiences, you become the beneficiary of perfect feedback about your own mental states. The man who treats you disrespectfully is showing you that somewhere in your consciousness, you have accepted the assumption that you are not worthy of respect. The situation that brings you stress is revealing that you have been assuming life to be stressful. The person who disappoints you is reflecting back to you your own assumption that people are unreliable. Once you see this clearly, anger becomes impossible because you realize that you are seeing yourself reflected in every experience. But understanding this intellectually is not enough. You must make this knowing a living reality in your daily experience. And this is where the real work begins, not the work of changing others or fixing external conditions, but the glorious work of revising your assumptions about yourself and your world. Every time you feel anger rising, every time irritation begins to stir within you, you now have a choice that most of humanity never realizes exists. Instead of reacting to the apparent external cause, you can pause and ask yourself, what assumption about myself or my world is this experience reflecting back to me? What inner conversation have I been having that is now appearing as this outer condition? This moment of pause, this instant of recognition, is where your freedom lies. For in that moment you remember that you are not at the mercy of external forces. You remember that you are the operant power in your world. You remember that every experience is simply consciousness, your consciousness, showing you what you have been assuming to be true. And in that moment of remembering, you can choose differently. Instead of assuming that people are inconsiderate, you can assume that everyone treats you with perfect respect. Instead of assuming that life is difficult, you can assume that everything flows effortlessly in your favor. Instead of assuming that you are a victim of circumstances, you can assume that you are the beloved of the universe, that all things work together for your good. But here is where most people falter. They understand this principle intellectually. But when the moment of testing comes, when someone says something that would normally trigger anger, they forget everything they have learned and react from their old assumptions. This is why I emphasize to you that this is not a philosophy to be understood, but a way of life to be lived. You must train yourself to catch these moments of potential reactivity and use them as opportunities to practice your mastery. When someone speaks harshly to you, instead of assuming they are being unkind, you can choose to assume they are having a difficult day, and your presence brings them comfort. When circumstances seem to go against you, instead of assuming life is unfair, you can choose to assume that this apparent challenge is actually redirecting you towards something far better. This is not about denying your feelings or pretending that hurtful words do not sting. This is about recognizing that your feelings are always responses to your assumptions, never to external facts. When you change your assumptions, your feelings change automatically. When you assume you are loved, respected, and cherished by life itself, any apparent evidence to the contrary is obviously false, a misinterpretation of what is actually occurring. The person who spoke harshly is really crying out for the love that you are. The situation that seems to oppose you is really the universe conspiring to bring you something better. The circumstance that appears limiting is really life itself preparing you for a greater expression of your true nature. When you hold these assumptions firmly, consistently, persistently, your entire emotional experience transforms. You begin to live from a place of such inner certainty about your true nature that external appearances lose their power to disturb you. You become like the sun, which shines equally on all, regardless of whether it's appreciated or not. You become like the ocean, which remains calm in its depths regardless of what storms may rage upon its surface. This transformation does not happen overnight, and I would be dishonest if I told you it did. But every moment offers you the opportunity to practice this mastery. Every interaction becomes a chance to choose your assumption rather than react from old patterns. Every challenging circumstance becomes an invitation to demonstrate your understanding that you are the operant power in your world. The beautiful thing about this practice is that as you begin to consistently choose empowering assumptions about yourself and others, your outer world begins to reflect these new assumptions back to you. The person who used to irritate you either changes their behavior, or simply disappears from your experience. The situations that used to stress you either resolve effortlessly or cease to arise. The circumstances that used to anger you transform or are replaced by conditions that support and uplift you. This is not magic. This is the natural operation of consciousness expressing itself according to the assumptions you persistently hold. When you assume you are surrounded by loving, respectful, supportive people, consciousness has no choice but to present you with experiences that confirm this assumption. When you assume that life flows easily and joyfully for you, the universe rearranges itself to match this inner conviction. But what about those times when someone genuinely wrongs you, you might ask? What about situations where real harm has been done? Even in these cases, the principle remains the same. The harm you experience is always the outer expression of some inner assumption you have been holding. This does not mean you are to blame for what others do. It means you have the power to ensure such experiences never occur again by changing your fundamental assumptions about yourself and your relationship to life. When you truly accept that you are the beloved of consciousness itself, that you are cherished and protected by the very fabric of reality, experiences of genuine harm become impossible. Not because you are living in denial, but because consciousness cannot present you with experiences that contradict your deepest assumptions about yourself. The person who knows themselves to be divinely protected and infinitely loved simply does not encounter situations where they can be genuinely harmed. This brings us to the deepest level of this teaching. Anger and irritation are not just emotional responses to external conditions, they are indicators of how much power you are giving to the world of appearances rather than remembering your true identity as consciousness itself. Every time you react with anger, you are essentially saying that something outside of you is more powerful than the consciousness you are. You are declaring that external conditions can determine your internal state. But when you remember that you are consciousness itself, temporarily focused in this particular experience, everything changes. How can consciousness be threatened by its own expression? How can the ocean be disturbed by its own waves? How can the dreamer be harmed by the characters in their own dream? The very notion becomes absurd once you truly grasp what you are. This is why the ancient teachers spoke of achieving a state beyond anger, beyond reactivity, beyond being moved by external circumstances. They were not describing an emotional numbness or a philosophical detachment. They were pointing to the natural state of consciousness that knows itself to be the source and substance of all experience. When you live from this knowing, you do not become cold or unfeeling. Quite the opposite, you become infinitely loving because you recognize everyone and everything as yourself expressed in countless forms. You become deeply compassionate because you understand that those who seem to cause trouble are simply operating from mistaken assumptions about themselves and their world. You become genuinely peaceful because you know that nothing in the world of appearances can touch the truth of what you are. The angry person becomes someone to have compassion for because you recognize they are suffering from the illusion that they are separate from their good. The difficult situation becomes an opportunity to demonstrate your mastery by maintaining your knowing of who you are regardless of what appears to be happening. The challenging circumstance becomes a chance to prove to yourself that your peace is not dependent on external conditions. This is the freedom that awaits you when you master this understanding. This is the liberation that comes from recognizing that you are never at the mercy of anything or anyone outside of yourself. This is the peace that surpasses all understanding because it is not dependent on understanding anything external. It comes from the simple recognition of your own true nature. But let me share with you the most practical aspect of this teaching. You do not need to wait until you have perfect understanding to begin experiencing the benefits of this knowledge. You can start immediately right now with whatever situation is currently challenging you. Instead of focusing on changing the external condition, focus on changing your assumption about it. If someone has been consistently difficult in your life, instead of trying to change them or avoid them, change your assumption about them. Assume they are actually one of your greatest supporters, that their apparent difficulty is really their way of helping you grow stronger. Hold this assumption persistently, regardless of their current behavior, and watch how the entire dynamic transforms. If you are facing a challenging situation at work, instead of worrying about how it will resolve, assume it is already resolved in your favor. Assume that this apparent challenge is actually leading to a promotion, a better position, or an opportunity you had not even imagined. Feel the relief and gratitude of this resolution as if it has already occurred, and continue to return to this assumption every time worry tries to creep in. If you are dealing with financial stress, instead of focusing on the apparent lack, assume you are financially abundant. See yourself as someone for whom money flows easily and consistently. Feel the security and freedom that comes with financial abundance. Make decisions from this assumption rather than from the assumption of lack. And watch how your external financial reality begins to shift to match your inner conviction. The key to making this practical is consistency. You must be willing to persist in your new assumption, even when external appearances seem to contradict it. This is where most people fail. They try the new assumption for a day or two, and when they do not see immediate external changes, they return to their old assumptions and wonder why the teaching did not work for them. But consciousness takes time to reorganize itself according to new assumptions. Just as it took time for your old assumptions to create your current external conditions, it takes time for new assumptions to externalize themselves. The difference is that with new assumptions, you begin to feel differently from. You begin to experience inner peace, confidence, and joy right away, even before the external changes become apparent. This inner change is actually more valuable than any external change because it proves to you that your state of being is not dependent on external conditions. You discover that you can be happy before you have reason to be happy. You can feel peaceful before your circumstances become peaceful. You can experience love and appreciation even when others are not treating you as lovingly as you would prefer. This is the true mastery, the ability to choose your internal state regardless of external appearances. When you develop this ability, you become truly free, because nothing outside of you can determine how you feel or how you experience life. You become the master of your own consciousness rather than a victim of external circumstances. And as you persist in maintaining your chosen assumptions, something wonderful begins to happen. The external world starts to conform to your internal state. People begin to treat you the way you have been assuming they treat you. Circumstances begin to flow the way you have been assuming they flow. Opportunities begin to appear that match your new assumptions about yourself and your life. This is not because you are manipulating external conditions. It is because external conditions have always been reflections of your internal assumptions. When you change your assumptions, you automatically change what consciousness can present to you as your external experience. The universe has no choice but to match your dominant inner convictions with corresponding outer experiences. The person who consistently assumes they are loved and respected will find themselves surrounded by loving, respectful people. The person who assumes that life flows easily for them will encounter minimal resistance in their daily activities. The person who assumes they are financially abundant will find opportunities for prosperity appearing in their experience. This is not wishful thinking. This is the mechanical operation of consciousness itself. But remember, the goal is not to change externals in order to feel better. The goal is to feel better, to choose your desired state, regardless of externals. When you master this, the externals change as a natural consequence, but your happiness and peace are not dependent on those changes. You are happy first, then your world reflects that happiness back to you. This understanding completely revolutionizes your relationship to anger and irritation. When you know that your emotional state is always a choice, that your peace is always available, regardless of what others do or say, that your joy is your natural inheritance, rather than something you must earn or achieve, then anger becomes obsolete. Not suppressed, not denied, but simply unnecessary. You no longer need to defend yourself against others because you know they cannot actually harm the truth of what you are. You no longer need to control circumstances because you know that circumstances respond to your assumptions rather than determining them. You no longer need to change anyone else because you know that as you change your assumptions about them, their behavior toward you automatically changes. This is the master key to emotional freedom. This is the secret that transforms victims into victors, reactors into creators, sufferers into masters. When you truly understand and apply this principle, you join the ranks of those who have discovered the greatest secret in the universe, that consciousness is the only reality. And you are that consciousness, free to choose what you will experience by choosing what you will assume to be true. The journey to this mastery begins with a single decision. the decision to take responsibility for your own emotional state, rather than giving that power to external conditions. It continues with the daily practice of catching yourself in moments of potential reactivity and choosing empowering assumptions instead of automatic reactions. And it culminates in the living realization that you are the operant power in your world, that everything in your experience is there by your invitation, and that you can change any experience by changing the assumption that created it. Tonight you have been given the key to emotional freedom. You have been shown the way to live beyond anger, beyond irritation, beyond being bothered by anyone or anything. The question now is not whether this works. Consciousness always expresses according to assumption. The question is whether you will use this knowledge consistently enough to prove it to yourself. I encourage you to begin immediately. Choose one person or situation that currently irritates you and decide on a new assumption about that person or situation. See them or it as blessing rather than burden, as opportunity rather than obstacle, as gift rather than problem. Hold this new assumption persistently, especially when appearances seem to contradict it. Feel the truth of this new assumption until it becomes more real to you than the old appearance. And watch as your entire experience transforms to match your new inner conviction. Remember, you are not trying to change anyone or anything outside of yourself. You are simply choosing to see the same people and situations through the lens of more empowering assumptions. As you do this consistently, consciousness has no choice but to present you with experiences that match these new assumptions. The difficult person becomes supportive. The challenging situation becomes beneficial. The irritating circumstance becomes a blessing in disguise. This is your natural inheritance as consciousness itself. This is your birthright as the operant power in your own world. This is the freedom that has always been yours, waiting only for you to claim it by choosing your assumptions rather than being chosen by them. Tonight you step into that freedom. Tonight you become the master of your own emotional experience. Tonight you discover that anger and irritation were never necessary, never justified, never anything more than the results of powerless assumptions about yourself and your world. From this moment forward, you are free. Free to choose peace over anger, love over irritation, empowerment over victimhood. Free to live as the consciousness you are rather than as the victim you mistakenly thought yourself to be. Free to create your experience from the inside out rather than being created by experiences that come from the outside in. This is your mastery. This is your freedom. This is your natural state restored.